So the mini set for Whizbang's workshop has been revealed. It is Dr. Boom's Incredible Inventions. And it's my favorite thing to do, talk about new cards and card reviews. And today we have 7. We got neutral legendary, you see here, Druid and Priest cards. Looks like more are going to be revealed for the following 4 days or so. So let's go ahead and kick things off here with Puppet Master Dorian. We all kind of expected this guy to return, given his relation to toys and puppets and all kinds of silly things in the past. And here he is. He's a 4-mana 2/6. This time, after you draw a minion, get a 1/1 copy of it that costs 1. So, of course, playing into that kind of miniaturized mini feel with all these 1/1s floating around. And clearly, if you have cards with high upside text, think about things like strong battle cries, for instance, where you don't really care about the stats of the card at all, then Puppet Master Dorian could be pretty scary. If you get a handful of really cheap, strong battle cries, especially if you're doing things like doubling those battle cries with Bran, then this could just be, you know, setting up for some crazy cheap swings. I mean, imagine Boom Boss Thogrin, who's already wreaking havoc on the Hearthstone meta with Bran Warrior stuff. Imagine getting an extra copy of Boom Boss that only costs 1. Now you're just destroying absolutely everything that the opponent has. So I will say, like, the upside on this is really spooky. Some other synergies that come to mind are things like Sonya in Rogue. She's able to copy those 1 costs. We've even got 1 cost stuff in Priest with Pip and things like, you know, automatons and so on in Priest. Or outside of that, you know, you could do shenanigans now with Dorian and Pip, maybe not even do automaton stuff. So there are certainly some angles that I see for this card where it makes a lot of sense. But when it comes to something like this, there are always some questions to ask that perhaps limit this card's impact or utility. Basically, there are 3 things I want to know, right? What am I drawing? Like, we solved that kind of, you know, we talked about some really cool things that could reward this. How consistently am I hitting the things I like, though? Because, of course, if you're running a bunch of minions in your deck, you may not be hitting the Boom Boss every time. You might be hitting something that's maybe not all that rewarding. What kind of card draw am I using, and how much of it, you know, is going off? Because if you're just drawing like 1 or 2 cards, you might hit some spells. Again, that decreases the odds of hitting the thing you care about. So do you need like specific tutors, for instance, to find the right kind of thing? And then there's also the question of just mana expenditure on this. Like, this has a 4 mana overhead, and then you also have to play the card draw as well. So you're sacrificing probably an entire mid-game turn, maybe even, you know, most of a late-game turn if you need to play multiple card draw cards and you're just not developing when it comes to tempo. There are maybe some instances where you can play this out on 4 and hope that it lives, but that's really risky if you're relying on it. So I don't know that this can necessarily be kind of a core game plan defining sort of card. It definitely has to be complementary and sort of secondary and maybe just feel like a bonus here and there. That's not always viable, though. Some metas just don't allow you to do those sorts of things. You have to be faster, you have to be more consistent and direct with your strategies and game plans. You can't necessarily take these flyers. And even something like Bran Warrior, it probably can afford to play a 4-cost card like Puppet Master Dorian, and we acknowledge there are some enormous payoffs off that as well. But ultimately, do they really need this? Like, would they rather just run another removal piece, another survival card? Because they kind of know they're going to dominate the late game anyway. It sort of feels like doubling down, being greedy. Do you really need this many Boom Bosses, right? So this might be kind of an unnecessary thing when you could run more key components instead. Like, do you need to put this overhead on yourself in order to help you win a game? Maybe some decks would value that more. Maybe like a Sonya Rogue needs this sort of thing to get there. But to me, it actually does feel a little bit more like, if you have the time to play this, if you have the mana to weave all this in, if you have that luxury, you might be in a pretty good spot anyway and might just be better off advancing a game plan directly and sort of setting up for later for shenanigans. But there are still sometimes win conditions that could open up out of this, combos that could exist because of this, and that does create some interesting little angles for it. Once again, even if it's not perfect in the average everyday list, this might create cheese, and cheese can sometimes still feel worth it. So moving on over to Priest, we just had some Priest cards revealed by Martian Boo. There's a link down in the description to all the card reveals this time around, so check them out, support all these. I think this is the first time card revealer, in fact. Love Martian Boo. This is a 4-mana spell called Delayed Product, and it reads, discover and summon a minion that costs 8 or more. It goes dormant for 2 turns. So discovering something big and then just, banking it on board for later. Frankly, this just looks really bad to me. I mean, yes, you are, cheating something big into play pretty affordably, but it's not really coming down and being able to make an impact until the stage where playing something big anyway is going to happen in a lot of decks. Like, a lot of decks are cheating out big things even earlier than this. We're seeing Sea Giants so early with these like Flood Paladins and stuff, right? They're getting your own equivalent 8/8 or 10/10 or whatever, because this can be 9 or 10 drops as well. Coming down that late in a game, it just doesn't feel like it's going to be worth it. A lot of decks are playing bigger things more aggressively than that, but also at that stage, removal and those sorts of things open up a lot more as well. It's going to be easy for people to deal with any sort of big threat. It would be helpful, right, if you find something that has an immediate impact when it comes out of dormant. So something that has like, rush or some sort of onboard effect, even just taunt minions could be nice. And you'll probably be able to find that with some consistency thanks to the Discover. You won't always just get piles of stats, but other times you will just get piles of stats, and this will feel terrible. And even when you do get the thing that has that immediate impact, this just feels so delayed. You're passing up key turns like turn 4. Often you need to start stabilizing in a deck around turn 4. You need to start advancing a game plan on turn 4. Priest typically is more about kind of stabilizing in those cases, because I think you'd have to run this in like a control deck. So maybe this, is fine off a Discover here and there. You're going to be okay to generate this. Like, oh, okay, yeah, this did something pretty sweet. I'm happy I got a nice big thing. I do not think you're playing this in your base deck list ever. I just don't think this makes any sense to run in a list. It seems too slow, too inconsistent, passes up such key turns. It's just not going to be worth it. So moving on over to Puppet Theater, a new location, 4 mana, 2 durability. Choose an enemy minion and get a 1/1 copy of it that costs 1. So more mini-themed stuff here. And, sometimes there could be great things to take from your opponent. A 1-cost Titan, for instance, could be a pretty spicy thing to grab. But again here, for Puppet Theater, this just feels like a really expensive card that is super conditional on your opponent having things that you want and you care about. There are going to be so many decks and matchups where you're playing against like a token hunter, and it's like, okay, I'm playing Puppet Theater for 4 and I'm getting a hound. It's just a 1/1 hound. It doesn't do anything, right? It's like, yeah, okay, maybe eventually they'll play their Agrabah or whatever, and you get a Titan out of it, but it's probably just going to be sitting there looking for a good target for a long time. And very rarely is this going to be something you need or care about remotely at all, because you're just reliant on your enemy cards. Obviously, if you could grab your own stuff, you could build into this and do something really cool. But since it's specific to enemy minions, it's just going to have so many matchups where it just sits dead. And even on the matchups where it does sit well, I'm not even sure it's that great anyway. Getting a 1-cost Titan's fine. I don't know if it's game winning. You've spent 5 on a Titan, basically, at least the first one. It's so easily dealt with. There just aren't that many great crazy payoffs on this, and it has quite a bit of attacks at that 4-cost base. So to me, again, this just looks dreadfully slow, way too conditional, just not a very good card. Moving on to the Fun House Mirror. I like this little reference to the old card Soul Mirror, but this is a single target version. It's 3 mana shadow spell. Summon a copy of an enemy minion. It attacks the original. So basically here, it's kind of like our last card, right? Like, you're getting a copy of your opponent's stuff. The important part here, of course, though, is that you're putting that copy into action immediately, and presumably very often just using this as kind of a single target removal option. We talked about like Flood Paladin earlier. They drop a Sea Giant early. You can use the Funhouse Mirror essentially to grab your own Sea Giant and clean up that 8/8 1-for-1. A lot of minions do have symmetrical stat lines, in which case, the Funhouse Mirror is going to solve the problem. If Sea Giants were a 7/8, boy, this would look a lot worse. But there are just so many matching symmetrical stat lines or more aggressively statted things with higher attack that would allow this to sufficiently remove. Now, the challenge perhaps for a card like this is almost the fact that Priest has so much good, cheap removal now and historically and probably presumably in the future as well, that you do wonder if sometimes this will compete. Like 3 mana for single target removals, not exactly efficient compared to, you know, like the Light It Burns or whatever stuff we've had. That's just super cheap ways to do a similar sort of thing. And although that card always felt good, it doesn't seem like crazy broken or anything. And this is kind of the same card if you squint for 3 mana. Now you might say to yourself, oh, well, you know, sometimes this creates value opportunity because you get your opponent's Titan. And, you know, many Titans aren't symmetrically statted, so your Titan would survive, and then you get an effect out of the Funhouse Mirror, which is true, but if your minion's surviving, that means the trade-off was that you didn't deal with the opponents with your Funhouse Mirror. So you're kind of always exchanging any value upside on this for, you know, lack of removal. There's sort of a balance there. The one scenario where it does kind of pan out in your favor, perhaps, is with Death Rattles. If there's a really strong Death Rattle on board, you can both deal with your opponent's Death Rattle and then also receive that Death Rattle upside yourself. The question is that going to be like net favorable for you if their deck is running and benefiting off Death Rattles? Perhaps they have additional synergies and bonuses that you can't quite as easily extract. So to me, it feels like you're probably still actually losing out a little bit here with the Funhouse Mirror and maybe not really dealing with things as efficiently as you might like. So I think this is a little better than our last 2 priest cards, but I do think this still has some unfortunate challenges. And again, it's very conditional based on meta and opponents, and there will be some scenarios where this card just doesn't really feel useful at all, which is a pretty big problem for things like removal. You need to make sure they work pretty much all the time. So moving on over to Druid, we got to do legendary here. Toyrantis, a 6 mana 7/7 beast. He's got Taunt and Elusive. Just a reminder on Elusive in case you've been away for a while. That is now the keyword for can't be targeted by spells or hero powers. Basically the old Tyrantis keywords there, or effects. But this time around it has a battle cry that is basically Omega cards, perhaps a little reference to Dr. Boom and Boomsday Project. If you have 10 mana crystals, this is going to gain +7/+7. Which of course does make this a 14/14, again in line with the currently buffed Tyrantis. I think it used to be a 12/12, but nowadays it's a 14/14. So when this works and you get up to 10, that is a 6 mana 14/14 with Taunt and Elusive. And I actually do think that's pretty disruptive. There are a lot of decks that would have a hard time dealing with a 14/14 Tyrantis, like aggressive board-based decks. You plop down a 14/14 with Elusive, they're gonna be like, oh man, I just have to trade in my whole board on this. Maybe can't even, you know, deal with it. I'm gonna take 14 back to the face. That is pretty prickly and hard to deal with, right? There will be plenty of other decks where it's frankly not very hard to deal with. You get into, you know, a Reno matchup, this just gets Reno'd away or whatever. It's not that hard. There are other examples of removal spells that don't require targeting. Death Knight has like Asphyxiate or something. Those sorts of effects could also deal with Toyrantis with relative ease. But, you know, that's probably not why you're running this card as a threat against those matchups. You're probably running this to try to stabilize against aggro. The problem is if you're running this to stabilize against more aggressive board-based strategies, to get to 10 mana on time, you've probably had to ramp a ton. And if you're ramping a bunch, then the aggro deck has probably killed you already. Like you've just spent so much time ramping and not stabilizing yet that they've just ran you over and you're dead. So there's, you know, you're trying to kind of thread the needle here a little bit with getting to 10 to make this big enough, but not also dying in the meantime. And if you get to 10 like at an organic pace without much ramp, then of course this is less likely to have made an impact soon enough. You're at a different stage of the game. You might have already stabilized against an aggro deck anyway. If you've made it that far, just it's self-evident that you survived. So, you know, it's kind of unnecessary in those cases. Alternatively, you know, against greedier decks, this has less of an impact perhaps at that stage of the game. So it's about finding that really narrow window for success with this card. And I personally think that window is a little bit too narrow. And I don't think this is necessarily great to play as a 6 mana 7/7. It's not like inherently awful by any means, but a lot of like board-based aggro decks, you know, they got a couple like 3/3s on board, a big weapon or something off Agromar like we talked about earlier. They're just going to push through this pretty easily at 7/7. It really does need to be bigger in order to get there. If this was like a 9/9 or something that went up to 14/14, maybe you'd have a little bit more chance, but even then, I don't know, a couple 3/3s, 3/3s trading in, it's not that hard for a lot of decks these days. So ultimately, I think the window on this is too narrow. I think it's going to be really hard to weave in at a kind of either meaningful time or meaningful stat break point, and therefore Toy Rantis will unfortunately kind of fall through the cracks. There's also the note that there's just not like a lot of great ramp in Druid right now. I mean, we still have access to Wild Growth. There's the big 6 mana thing. I forget what that's called, Crystal Cluster or something like that. But a lot of like dragon-based plans, which just doesn't really fit into necessarily. So it doesn't necessarily meld well with like the spell damage package or the dragon package. It's not crazy to toss this in as a one-of because it doesn't require synergies necessarily, but it just doesn't fuel those other ones either. So just maybe in a little bit of a weird spot. If we see some like big beast stuff come along in the future that's got either like a more consistent ramp package or ways to utilize beasts or cheat them out, Tarantis looks more intriguing there, which our next card is also going to be relevant to that conversation. Because this is Snuggle Teddy, a new 3 mana 2/4, and it introduces a new keyword in a mini set, which is crazy. I don't think we've ever had that before. This is Gigantify, which is the opposite of Miniaturize, basically. Gigantify gives you a copy in hand that is an 8 mana 8/8 instead of a 1 mana 1/1. Snuggle Teddy basically has the same sort of stuff as Toy Rantis, except this adds in Lifesteal, which is honestly pretty nice. I think that's really worth a lot more against an aggro deck in particular, because, you know, if they are, as we talked about, like trading in a few 3/3s or whatever to clean up your taunts, in this case, you're healing on the back of that, at least with your Snuggle Teddy, right? Like a board-based deck might actually be forced to heal you up for like 16 or 24 or something, which could definitely be game ending if you can thread the needle again on the Snuggle Teddy and get it down soon enough. Not to mention the 3-cost Snuggle Teddy, like, yeah, you know, okay, I'm getting a little something in the meantime, just, you know, interrupting them, speed bumping a little bit, maybe healing like 4 or something. Saving myself another couple attacks, in essence netting maybe 6-8 health or something off the Snuggle Teddy is not a bad little thing for a 3-drop to do. I think the question though again is like, do you really want to pay 8 mana for just an 8/8, you know? And against a lot of decks, again, it's just going to get wiped out easily despite the elusive aspect. So it's about finding the right matchups and the right timing. It's like you want to play Snuggle Teddy, but you also probably need to weave in some ramp, because if your Snuggle Teddy's coming down on 8, it's probably too late. It might need to come down on like 6 or something in order to be fast enough to turn the corner, because it's all about like 1 turn difference, right? If this comes down too late, they're just going to send damage over the top, kill command you or something, and it was too late for the lifesteal to matter. So you have to find the right windows for these sorts of cards. So, you know, if Gigantify was 6 mana 6/6, I'd be a lot more into this card than I am at 8 mana 8/8. I think, again, it's just a little bit too slow, but keep an eye out, because we're seeing some like beast, elusive, taunty stuff coming together here. I wonder if this is a teaser or a setup or something we might see in the future. So I don't think these cards are going to make much impact right now, but I would keep an eye on these just in case those synergies do get explored. I think these have some latent potential. It's just going to take a while to find it, perhaps. So moving on here to Overgrown Beanstock. This is a 3 mana spell. It summons you a 2/2 Treant and draws a card for each Treant you control. So at a base, of course, that's a 2/2 that draws you a card even on an empty board. Not great, but not a disaster play, I don't think necessarily. Sometimes you might be okay with that. Just get a little bit of a body on board and get some gears turning on card draw. But I think this card has like crazy potential, honestly, because we've seen Treant Druid so many times just getting absolute monster Treant boards super early in the game. And the fact that this both contributes to your board and potentially draws you 3, 4, 5 cards, whatever it is, right? That is an absolutely insane amount of reload for decks that typically like dump a bunch of stuff on board quickly. We don't have the craziest Treant package right now in standard format. Like, there aren't a lot of Treant builders. There's Witchwood Apple, Era Soilizer, the Blood Treants, which are actually kind of a cool idea. Like, just play 2 Blood Treants with this, you know, all at once and just like draw 3. That's kind of neat. But there are really good Treant payoffs right now. We have like Drum Circle, Cultivation, probably more importantly, is a really good payoff right now. The 8 mana spell that gives all your minions +2/+2, but gets discounted with Treants. So in other words, maybe still another card that's not there yet. I don't know if you can do enough to make a Treant deck right now. Maybe it's not crazy, but it might be a little hard to get enough consistency out of it compared to some of the craziness we're seeing in the meta elsewhere. But again, bank this one for later, because as soon as you get a few more Treant cards that can do some consistently good stuff early, this is absolutely bonkers, right? Like, imagine just drawing 5 off this and still developing your board alongside it, you know? That's going to be gross. Even if it happens on turn 3 sometimes for like 3 or 4 draws, that's going to feel nuts. And then sometimes it's going to happen late in the game where you just play a card that summons like 5 Treants or whatever and this, and just completely reload for wave 7 of your Treant token deck. So I like this card a lot. I don't expect you to see it soon, but it's going to be nuts, I suspect, at some stage if they print any Treants at all. All right, so now let's rate these cards from 1 to 5 stars. Puppet Master Dorian is a 3-star card. Delayed Product is a 1-star card. Puppet Theater is a 2-star card. Funhouse Mirror is a 3-star card. Toy Rantus is a 2-star card. Snuggle Teddy is a 3-star card. Overgrown Beanstock is a 4-star card. And there you go. That wraps it up for review number 1 of the Whizbang's Workshop mini set. There is a schedule out for cards. Looks like we're going to get some more neutral stuff tomorrow alongside Hunter and Mage. And then the day after that's maybe some neutral stuff and Demon Hunter and Warrior. And then we got Shaman, Paladin, Rogue the day after that. And then finally Death Knight and Warlock. So looks like maybe 5 days of reviews here. And yeah, as always, I'm going to check these cards out when they come out. I hope to do... I don't know. I'd like to do 7+ videos on the new stuff. We'll see how many ideas actually engage and excite and how much opportunity there is. But yeah, I don't know if you guys know this. I've actually hit Legend in Hearthstone in the last 2 months, which is weirdly consistent for me. I probably will this month again as well. So I've actually been playing more than some people might expect. And it's still planned to do this level of content here on this channel, by the way. I'm kind of trying to make this the Hearthstone spot. So card reviews, new card stuff. I actually want to hop into Arena a little bit and try that just for some fun, a little one-off kind of videos here and there. And we might do some duels, like old school duels videos, kind of a retrospective, like talk about the run a little bit from modern day perspective, and then like go in and let you watch an old run sort of thing. So have some ideas cooking, and of course sticking around with the new cards as well for Hearthstone. Always enjoy seeing all this fun new stuff and trying out some of the coolest ideas. So anyway, thanks for watching. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't yet and you want to watch my Hearthstone stuff. And yeah, that's it. So I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks again, and until next time, game on.